So my name is Jerilyne Chang. I am an intervention specialist at TVA in Hillsboro, Oregon, and my job is varied, working with ESL students and also working with any student that's struggling. So today we're here to talk a little bit about ESL students specifically and background information and strategies to help them learn in the classroom. So the first thing that I want to talk about is where to begin with a student who doesn't speak English. And very, very important, first thing I would say is the attitude of the teacher. It's really important that you know that they can succeed and you expect them to succeed. With a lot of acronyms that we have in education and many things anyway. I'm going to use a couple, but I'm going to explain them. BICS, B-I-C-S, is Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills. And that just means a student's ability to speak with their friends, to be able to function and say things like, I need this, where's the bathroom, you know, I need to go home, whatever, things like that. Or even just language that they use on the playground or during games. So that's kind of social language. And the other one, the acronym is CALP, C-A-L-P, and that's Cognitive Academic Language Proficiencies. And you may already know about these too. What I hear a lot is when a student is able to communicate on the playground or with their peers, the teachers then assume, oh, they don't need extra help. Look how well they talk. A question I often get is, how come they can talk just fine when they're with their friends, but then they come into class or I try to teach something and they don't understand. They're just, they're just not trying. Well, the truth is, social language and academic language are very, very different. So once you have an understanding that students do need help with language acquisition, even if they can carry on a conversation, then the question is, like, where do I start? What do they need to know? And your specific state that you teach in should have a website. That's the Department of Education. Actually, each state has a state standard section on their website, and there is an ESL section there. Now, it shows two things that are really helpful. It shows you the progression of what they need, and it shows you which specific subjects that progression moves in, and then it also gives you a level for beginner language, intermediate language, and advanced. Another thing that can be a little bit difficult to figure out, but once you figure it out, it's very, very helpful. No matter what grade a student's in, they need content level that's at grade level. If their language ability is not equal to the grade level, then what do we do? And I thought I would just give you a couple of examples first. One is that I had a 5th grade student who is from Korea. He's very good at math, not a problem, but he doesn't have the vocabulary for math. So what I did is I got some basic little books that you might use in preschool, kindergarten, and 1st grade. I try to get ones that won't make them feel like little kids, but to have some structure in them. And one of the things he was struggling with was what's an odd number and what's an even number. Not because he doesn't know the concept, but because he doesn't understand the vocabulary. So I got one of those books, and we just started reading it together, and I had him read it out loud. And then we talked about it, and then I would say, is this number odd or even? And he kind of guessed, and then we talked about it more and gave more examples, and all of a sudden he said, oh yeah. And then I just gave him numbers. Is this number odd or even? Started calling off numbers, and he just had to say odd or even. First of all, he got the concept. He now had words to go with that concept, and then he needs practice expressing it. So even though he understands it, go ahead and practice a little bit with him. So that was one example where it just took 10 minutes, and now we don't have to talk about odd or even anymore. The other thing that's important, and I have in the back of the room, for example, I have all the colors, but I have white written in white, the word purple is written in purple, the word gray is written in gray. And when you have that kind of visual that's color-coded, that's also extremely important. The same thing with the alphabet that we have, all the vowels are highlighted in green. And so that I can say to a student, what are the vowels, or can you tell me what the vowels are? And if they aren't sure, they can look up on that wall and they can say to themselves, they're saying, okay, all I have to do is say the letter names of those ones that are highlighted in green. And the more that they do that, after a while, they won't have to look anymore. It's a tool. Another thing is combining words and pictures. And this is just an example of something that I do. I was working with careers. And we use this for a lot of things. I would use this to help them with structuring sentences using adjectives, where they have to talk about something. I could use it for expanding their use of nouns. And then also changing a sentence like, his coat is blue, it's a blue coat. So there are a lot of different things that you can use just with pictures. You can pull those off the internet, or if there are specific books that you're using. Students need to interact with a word or a concept 42 times in order to really master it. And just think about how many times we tell a student something and then they ask again and we say, I just told you that yesterday. And then if you have a student do that, ask yourself how many times have they interacted with that word or that concept. So when and you can do, I guess, different ways of doing it. My way of doing it is I always think 45, 45, 45. That's my magic number. And I'm thinking I want them to interact with that word 45 times. I want them to say it. I want them to spell it. I want them to trace it. I want them to see it in a bunch of different sentences. I want to see them find it in a picture. Any way that I can. My goal is to have them interact with it 45 times. If we can incorporate as many senses as possible, as you know, it's going to create a better learning environment. So if with vision we can combine color coding, if we can combine them writing, tracing, every time they talk about something, seeing a picture, then they're going to remember it more. And I have various things around the room here that are examples of that. And I leave them up so that, for example, I have a list of adjectives up here. And I leave those up there so that whenever we're working with adjectives, they can see it. They know it's up there. I also have an example of adjectives and nouns being color-coded behind me. And those are good for any student who struggles. One of the other questions that I was asked was, how do I adapt a lesson for any ESL student that's in my class? One of the first things that I would say when you're going to do lesson planning, or you're going to figure out what you want to do with an ESL student, I would put an ESL component in every single lesson anyway. Just assume, and then if you ever have an ESL student, then you're capable of, you have already planned and thought about it. There are a couple websites. One is called ELL Toolbox, and we'll give you that information. The other one is everythingesl.net. And if you will look on those sites, you can look up the word SIOP, S-I-O-P. And again, I'll give you two websites for SIOP. And that stands for Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. And you can get the Sheltered Instruction book on Amazon. It's a very good book, it's a very good concept, and it gives you specific strategies that work with a variety of situations, and we'll talk about some of those. The other one is GLAD, G-L-A-D, and some of you probably have heard of that. So when you're adapting material, and you need to put an ESL component in there, the first thing is that you need to have a specific goal. And SIOP will expound on that further if you look up information on SIOP. One thing that is really helpful is a template. When we want a student specifically to write or to express themselves in a certain way, templates help get them started and also help teach them the structure of the language and the structure of what you're trying to do. If you want them to do an introduction and 3 points and a conclusion, then you give them the start of the introduction. You give them the start of 3 points, and you give them the start of the conclusion. And as they do that with a template, then they will start using that information in their other writing and work, their homework. If I were giving a template, I might say, this summer my family and I, and then leave it blank. The 3 things I liked most about my vacation were, I wish I could have blank. I'm glad that we blank. So they don't have to think about sentence structure so much as just getting the ideas that they want down. Accommodation needs to happen at every step. So accommodation needs to happen, of course, when you're teaching the material. But if you're using accommodation when you're teaching, then when you have them turn in homework, you're going to want accommodation with that too, whether it's a template or whether it's instead of them writing a whole paragraph, you may give them questions to answer so that they know what to write about. And tests as well. So you may give them a test and it may be color-coded, or they may have a vocabulary box that they can choose from because when they see it, they remember. They may have pictures that they can match to things. Those are ways to accommodate, but it needs to be accommodated across across their work, from teaching it to assessment. The other thing that I really want to touch on is group learning. Students learn so much more from their peers, and if we can create an environment where all the students are working together, they're all going to learn more. So when I'm thinking about group learning, I automatically put students in pairs or in foursomes, so they're always in a group of some kind. If I ask a question and I just one person in the class, how many people have answered that question? Only one. So we want every student in their head thinking about what is the answer to that. If I want everyone to really participate in that, what I would do is have them in, let's say they were in groups of 4 to a table. And I would say, okay, we've talked about this subject, and I'd like you to come up with 4 ways that we adapt to our environment, let's just say. I would like each group to talk in your table groups and come up with 4 ways that we adapt to our environment. Make sure that everyone in your group knows what all 4 of those are, because I'm going to call on one of your group members, and you're going to get points if you can come up with reasons. So what this does is it makes sure that if there is a student that isn't getting it, they all make sure that student's getting it. So then I can say, James from table 1, can you please give me 1 way that we adapt? And if that student says, I don't know, I would say, it looks to me like your table group didn't finish. I'm going to give you a few more minutes. Would you guys please go back to your group, talk about it, and make sure everybody in your group knows 4 ways that we adapt to our environment. So it's nobody's put on the spot, but you have a lot of learning taking place. We, in general, do not give enough think time to students. And for an ESL student, it's even, sometimes they're translating the language, and then they're unsure of themselves, or they're embarrassed, wondering if their English is right. And so think time is so very important. That brings us right into some of the specific PSYOP strategies. And I want to talk about several of them. One is called think, pair, share. And for example, when I'm teaching reading to young ones especially, I have them sitting on the floor and they're paired up. And so then I use a hand motion and say, okay, it's think time. Right now we're going to think. We're going to be going back to our desks and we're going to be writing about our favorite animal. So right now, put your fingers on your head and I want you to think, what is my favorite animal? So this allows all the students to think. It keeps students from shouting stuff out randomly. And for ESL students, it gives them time to formulate their thoughts. So then I'm saying, okay, now that you've thought of what your favorite animal is, I'd like you to turn to your partner. And number one, students, or they might be, I don't know, peanut butter and chocolates. Peanut butters, tell chocolates what your favorite animal is, and they tell. Now chocolates tell peanut butters, what's your favorite animal? Now they've verbalized, they thought about it and they verbalized to somebody else. And every student has talked in the same amount of time that it would take to ask the whole class. Then I would say, okay, let's put our thinking fingers to our brains again. We're going to think again. I'd like you to think about 3 things that you like about that favorite animal. So just think, what are 3 things that I like about that? Right now we're just going to be thinking, and I'm just, giving them 20 seconds or so. Sometimes more depending on what the age is. And then I will say, okay, it's time to share. So then they share with each other, do the same thing. And then I might ask 3 or, depending on how many kids are in the class, but I might ask 3 or 4. Carlos, would you tell me what your partner told you? So this, again, makes sure that they're listening, they interact, and when they know that's coming, they're going to learn that really fast. They're going to listen and they're going to be prepared because they know what's coming. So a lot, in a short period of time, a lot of interaction has taken place, a lot of think time has happened, and a lot of talking has happened. So those are all specific goals that we have for ESL students in particular. Another strategy is like you may count the students off 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. In their groups, and then you say, okay, all the 1s come over here, 2s, 3s, and 4s, and each one of them studies about a certain topic or reads an article, and they have to read one section. Then they all go back to their tables, and so at each table there's a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4, and the 1 student is the expert, and they teach what that 1 group talked about. The 2 at that table teaches what that 2 group talked about. 3 does the same, and 4. So you allow the students to get a lot of information in a shorter period of time, and you also give each student an opportunity to share what they've learned, and then also to learn from someone else. 2 very important skills. Another strategy for helping the ESL student talk in class or share in the discussions is help prepare them ahead of time. So if you know that you're going to be talking about the westward movement in the U.S. and you are going to have a class discussion about that, you can talk with your student and say, we're going to have a discussion and I'd like you to answer a question. I have these 3 questions. Which one do you feel most comfortable answering? And they'll pick one. And then you say, you can go and write about that and come back to me and I'll help you structure it, or if you need any help, just let me know. And then on Tuesday, we're going to be discussing that, and I will be asking you to give us that answer. So they've had time to prepare, they've had time to think, they've had time to write it out. I allow them to read it. Some students like to try to just say it after writing it, but some are so scared they just want to read it. So once again, you've given them an opportunity to work out the kinks, to think about the language part, that then they're then able to communicate the content part. Oh, the tough subject of how to touch on background knowledge for an ESL student. So I have some very basic points, I guess you could call them. Number one is to know the background and culture of your student. That's true not only just for ESL students, but that is true for all of your students. Because if a student has never seen a zoo before and you talk about the zoo and say, well, it's just like what you saw, what you see at the zoo, they're going to have no clue what that means. If you're in a situation where you're in a very high economic level, then you're going to know that the students aren't going to understand certain things maybe about difficulties in life. Or maybe you assume that because they're a higher economic status, that they come from a specific kind of family, and they might not. You have students that, whose parents are divorced. They have family members who are sick and dying. I remember I subbed in a class one time and a kid was just being a pill, and he walked out of class and all the other students were like, he's having a really hard time. Can we go get him? And I said, yeah, just, do whatever. And come to find out, his dad had actually shot himself the night before. I don't even know what he was doing at school, but the kid was really having a hard time. Those kind of things are helpful for a teacher to know. Low SES, which means socioeconomic status, is very important because different standards, different values, different experiences all accommodate those backgrounds. I wanted to give you an example. I was teaching a second grade writing class, and the students I had asked the students to write about their favorite, I think it was their favorite toy or their favorite thing that they had in their room, something like that. And they were really struggling. And this was a school that was, it's a Title I school, which means 60% or more of the students are below poverty level. And I asked them they were struggling with coming up with something, and I asked them, let's look at it this way. If your house was on fire and you had to grab 3 things, what would you grab? And they still couldn't do it. And at that point, I knew that I was missing something. And so I went over to one little boy and I said, if your house was on fire and you needed to grab something, what would you grab? And he looks at me and he goes, my pillow. And what I realized is that I was just plain barking up the wrong tree. A lot of the kids didn't even live in houses. They live in, and I know some of the kids live in shelters because their moms are battered. Some of them live in cars. Some of them live with their families, some of them don't. So for me, to try to create a writing assignment like that was really not helpful at all. So I had to completely change what my tune was. Okay, the question now is, how much do we expect students to speak English in class? How much can they speak their native language? What's helpful, what isn't helpful? So, I will repeat think times. Number 1, think time, think time. They need time to formulate ideas and formulate language. That is so important. We talked about if you want them to speak in class, give them a chance to write it out, go over it with them. So preparation is very, very important. They need time to prepare. Many times you will find that they want to show you their work before they hand it in. If you think that that's not a good idea, you're really hurting them. Because I think traditionally we have thought, well, I want it to be your ideas, and I want it to be something you created. And while that's true, when there is a language or information barrier, they're really only trying to turn in something that they think you will like. So allowing them to really come to you and ask you questions and accept input from you is really important. I also would say don't discourage use of their first language in class, especially if you have more than one student who speaks the same language, because what they will do is they will hash it out. And one will say, no, that's not right, in their language, in their mother tongue, and the other one will say, it is too right because blah, 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 and they're going to be talking and saying, and they usually come to a conclusion and say, oh, yeah, that's what that is. Then they're ready to come back to class and participate in the English conversation. One of the suggestions or ideas that I had would be to say to them, take 10 minutes and work on this together. And when you're finished and ready, come back and let us know what you found out. And they'll come up with an answer typically. Communication with parents can be difficult if the parents speak little or no English. And depending on the school that you're a part of, translators may or may not be available. I would definitely check with your administration and find out if that's a service that they can provide, because it should be provided if there are students, parents who don't speak English. Another important aspect that we usually don't think about is when you're doing the open house or the program at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year where parents come and you have a little talk and you introduce the teachers and all of that, that should be translated. Again, because the parents that don't speak English are kind of at a loss. And you'll sometimes see they will bring their own, or maybe a family member will translate. You'll see that happening sometimes. But I think it's an honorable thing to do to translate at those kinds of meetings. I would say learn some basic phrases in the various languages of your students where you can at least say, hi, how are you? Your student is doing well. Those would be really, really good phrases to know. And they appreciate that. Big red flag of what not to do is do not have the student be the translator ever. Because who knows what they might say. And sometimes you need to talk with the parents about things that you really don't need the student in on. And sometimes the students, it puts them in a precarious situation. So I would also say that while we do have regular conferences at the quarter times of the year or semester, if you can have a monthly meeting with an ESL parent, it would be really helpful. Generally, when students come from other countries, they have a belief system that the teacher knows what to do, and they don't necessarily think that their input is really important. The students that I work with, I sit down with the parents and let them know that we're a team and that I need them to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to check in with them again next month, and you know, hopefully they will have mastered number 1, and then we'll add number 2 next month, and just keep that kind of communication going. I would also encourage you to send home material to them in the form of a letter. If you're sending home a weekly newsletter, that's fine too. If you can have it translated, that's great. So if your students are having a challenge with English and everyone around them is just moving forward, what is going to happen to them? Are they going to sleep in class? What are they going to do? Are they going to try? What's up? I would say that we need to be careful not to mistake unattention and what appears to be boredom as actual boredom or lack of motivation. it's more than likely lack of understanding and embarrassment to try because they don't want to feel humiliated. One rule is this is not a case for busy work. Busy work does not benefit you, it doesn't benefit the student, it doesn't benefit anybody. So be purposeful and keep the material relevant. If I'm doing a unit on the eye for science, I don't need to assume that since they can't understand the vocabulary that they can't understand anything about the eye. I need to choose the vocabulary that I want them to learn. I need to choose supplemental books that the words are a lower level, but the content is the same as what I'm teaching to their friends. And I would say set goals with your students. If you assume that they're just bored and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, sit down with them, talk to them, find out what's going on, find out what they need, find out what they would like, and come up with a plan and say, okay, this is what we're going to do this week, this is the one thing we're going to work on. And you can offer an array of kudos, awards, whatever you want to call them. And your students will then have a specific goal. If you keep that goal to yourself and you say, well, I want to do this, but you're not engaging them in that goal, they're not a part of it. And so they're not going to care that much. They're not even going to know about it in some cases. So I would say that is a little bit time consuming, but if you want to get your student involved, that's really important. I would say that taking a bit of time to let the ESL students talk about their own culture would be very, very important. That would give the other students a chance to ask questions, which make them feel more a part of the ESL student's life. And it also makes the ESL student an expert at something. I would also encourage you to talk about things in a group. You can have a class meeting and say, we have these students who are struggling with English and we want to be the best class they've ever had. And I'm wondering if any of you have any ideas about what our class environment could be so that they would, learn English well, and how can we help them? How can we contribute to their success? And as you know, when you ask students to problem solve, you get many, many great answers because they're really good at problem solving. And when you make them a part of the process, that's what then they're going to do. They're going to participate. They're going to be a part of it. The student's not going to be isolated. I wanted to share one of my resources with you. It's easily and readily available on Amazon. This is a series of reading comprehension passages, I guess you would say. They're called paired passages, and they pair a fiction and a nonfiction with a similar topic, or with a similar topic. And then if you have a topic coming up, let's say you're going to talk about service animals. There's one in here that has to do with a service animal, and you can use that to create some background knowledge. It helps create some vocabulary, and it can be a little bit lower than their grade level in terms of words, language, but not in content. So I wanted to give you an example of that. So this is grade 2, paired passages. It's from teacher created materials. And I've put mine into a notebook because then it's easier to copy them. So I'm going to show you how I might use this. The nonfiction one is about rescue dogs, and it's about St. Bernards and how they rescue a man in the snow. And it's just 2 kind of long paragraphs. And then the fiction one is called Why I Don't Like Chocolate Cake. And it's also about a service dog, but it's about a dog who sniffs for food. He's an agricultural assistant dog. So he works in the airport and sniffs out food, not chocolate cake though. and it talks about how they train him. And it's fiction because the content is real, but it's written from the dog's perspective, so the dog is talking. And this does a lot for the teaching situation. I can talk about why these situations are true, but one of the stories is true and one of them isn't, and what makes it fiction. We had a great discussion about breeds of dogs. We had a discussion about why a Saint Bernard is really a good dog for rescue, and why a Beagle is good for working at the airport. We just talked about a lot of things that had to do with dogs and breeds of dogs. We talked about what kind of dogs they had in their country and if they had their own dogs, things like that. There's just a few questions, usually about 5 questions. And then they have another concept that they add to it, whether it's putting the story in order, whether it's looking at cause and effect, just some other type of a concept that they're working with. So these are really, really excellent for, well, I'm sure that you can come up with many ideas to use them. I use them with ESL students, and it's one of the ways that I create background knowledge and vocabulary for something that I'm already working with in class.